Okay, welcome to this clip where we're going to start diving into Amazon Inspector. Now, Amazon Inspector is a tool and service that's offered by AWS to allow us to perform several different functions that help us maintain this strict security posture as well as meet compliance standards and requirements. Now, the first thing it lets us do is perform active auditing. So we're going to be able to actively monitor and audit our current AWS resources, and then if needed to, alert on any violations. The next thing that it allows us to do is identify application security issues. So if we're missing some patches for some operating system packages that we might have installed, we're going to be able to identify and act on those different issues. It also allows us to gain a better understanding of our resources as a whole. With this insight, we're going to be able to truly understand what's going on within our resources, such as those missing security patches or some type of auditing, or maybe some type of malicious software that we might have installed on our resources, specifically our EC2 instances. The next thing it allows us to do is to really work with configuration scanning and monitoring. So if some of our EC2 resources don't meet our standard for our configuration, we're going to be able to scan and monitor and pick up on things that are violations. Now, it also comes with a built-in content library, and what this means is they provide certain baselines for us to use when we're running them against our templated targets. And we'll discuss what that means here in a moment. And then the last big benefit is that we can automate everything via an API. So we can perform API calls to automate our scanning and configuration monitoring processes. So let's actually go ahead and check out Amazon Inspector in the console. Now I have it loaded already, so when you come to this screen, you're going to see the Get Started screen. We can see it gives you the typical definition of what the service does, and then there's a few different articles we can choose from here: install, run, and analyze. And then we have the basic getting started and documentation links at the bottom here. So I'm going to click on Get Started, and we can see it's initially going to welcome us. Hey, welcome to Amazon Inspector. And we can see that it states that it's going to check for security exposures and these different vulnerabilities in our EC2 instances. And we can see that it also allows us to do an easy assessment setup. So we can set up for network assessments, and you can see that it lists that Inspector Agent is not required for network assessments. And then underneath it, you can see that it talks about what's being performed. It's going to check our network configuration, run an analysis on that, and then it's going to check for ports that might be reachable from the outside. And you can see as an optional thing here, where it says if the agent is installed, it can also find processes reachable on a port. So it's going to dive in a little bit deeper than just the outer layer of our instances. And then we see a demo, or an example, I should say, of a pricing breakdown. The next option we see is our host assessments, and this requires our agent to be installed. And we can see that this performs a few different assessments. It's going to do CVE scanning, so vulnerabilities. It's going to look for host hardening, and then it's going to see if we meet security best practices. And underneath that, it talks about how we can deploy our agent. So it's going to say that it requires an agent to be installed, and you can actually utilize the Systems Manager run command, which we actually talked about in a previous clip, to install this Inspector agent on all of your instances very easily. Now for this clip, I actually already have an Amazon Linux instance spun up that has the Inspector agent pre-installed. It's actually one of the AWS provided AMIs that you can use. So when we actually start looking at the terminal, we'll see what that looks like. Now the next thing we see here is we can run weekly, which is the recommended practice. We can run this once to see what it does, or we can go into advanced setup. So since this is a clip when we're trying to learn deeper into it, let's do advanced setup here. And it takes us to another page. Now it's just going to give us a less GUI looking type of interface here, and it requires a little bit more configuration. So we'll leave the name the default, assessment target all instances. And you can see the next option is if we want to run this on all instances in our account and region. So if I uncheck this, we can see that we can scan by tags instead of running on all of them. So if I wanted to search for a certain key value pair for a tagged instance, I can do that. For this clip, I'm going to go and select all instances just to be safe. And then underneath that, we see install agents. Now, this is going to allow Amazon Inspector to install the Amazon Inspector agent on all of our instances in this assessment target. So you'll see their note where it says if you're going to do this, you need to make sure that your EC2 instances have the SSM agent installed in a role that allows them to communicate with the run command. So I don't need this, so I'm going to unselect this because I already have it installed, and I'm going to click Next. The next thing we do is define an assessment template. So this is where we're essentially specifying all of our properties and rules that we want to run here. So I'll leave the name the same, assessment template default, and then you can see we can actually either remove or add these different rules packages that are in here. So if I wanted to, I could take out, let's say, CIS, Operating System Configuration Benchmarks here, and then I can add a different one of Runtime Behavior Analysis. So you can kind of swap out which ones you want to use for different assessments. So I'm actually going to go ahead and take this out, and let's just leave these three here: Network Reachability, Security Best Practices, and CVE. So this should hopefully speed up our assessment time as well. Now the duration is the next configurable option. You can see AWS recommends a 1 hour duration, and you see their note under here that's saying, hey, you can modify this, but understand that the longer durations are going to have a fuller set of findings because you can run these different scans at a deeper and longer level. Now for this clip, I'm going to set it to 15 minutes because I want to speed this up, but it's good to know that you can actually select all the way up to 24 hours if you wanted to. So I'm going to leave 15 for now, and let's move on. The next thing we see here is that we can actually set up an assessment schedule. So if we wanted to, we can set this up to recur once every so many days. And it's good to note that the first run is going to start on this initial creation. So it's going to start right away and then on this recurring schedule that we set. Now I'm not going to set one up, but it is recommended to run it at least once weekly for your resources. So I'm going to go and unselect this so it's not enabled, and then I'm going to click on Next. Now we move to the review screen. So if we wanted to, we can review all of this, and if needed, choose one of these edit buttons over here on the right in order to edit some of these settings. It all looks good to me, so what I'm going to do is scroll down here, and I'm going to click on Create. And there we go, success. Assessment run started. So actually, while this is running, I'm actually going to scroll over to my terminal, and I'm actually SSH'd into the instance that this assessment is running on. Now, to verify that our agent is installed and running, there's a command you can run, which is listed here. And this is in the documents that they provide. But if you run a status command on this AWS agent, you can see that we get all of the different config rules that are in place. So if I scroll up here, you're going to see the agent ID, which is the instance name, or instance ID, I should say. You see collecting true here, and then you can see our last registration attempt date, all the different dates, as well as our assessment ARN that are specific to this assessment and this target. So this is basically a dump in a readable format of what's being configured and assessed on this instance. So I'm actually going to go back to our console screen here. I'm going to click refresh one time, and we can see it's collecting data. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to pause this clip, and then after about 15 minutes, I'll go ahead and resume it, and we'll take a look at all of the data that was collected. Okay, so I've been letting this run for a few minutes. I'm actually not going to let it run for 15 minutes because it probably is not going to come back with any findings, so it's really not necessary. But as you can see, this is still collecting data here, so if I drop this down, we can see this assessment run that's going on. There's a status of collecting data. We've had 0 findings so far. But what's a neat little feature here is we can show our agents that are running, and you can see our instance ID, it's truncated obviously, the status of it, and then the status of the actual inspector agent as well. So it's collecting data. So I'm going to click OK here, and the next thing I want to show is Show Status. So we can see that it has been analyzing all of our instances for the past 5 minutes. And this service itself has received 645 messages from this one agent. So you can kind of keep track of what's going on and how many messages are being reported back. Now if I scroll back up to the top here, you'll see on the left we also have a dashboard screen. So when you come to Inspector after you configure it, you'll see this dashboard. And you can see you can have them help you create a new assessment. But what I want to show you is really you can see your different findings that are coming on as well as your different assessment statuses. So you can see we have one running right now, which is the one we kicked off. And obviously we've had none of them complete and none of them fail. So after this is done, this one should move to either completed or failed. And if there are any findings with it, we're going to see it under here in notable findings. So this will allow us to quickly jump to any findings, which will be violations that were dug up by Amazon Inspector. And then lastly, over here on the right, you can see we've had a recent assessment run, and this is collecting the last 10, but we only have one. And it provides you a shortcut to view that specific assessment. So if I click on this, it takes us back to that same screen. And you can see they put a filter for that particular assessment template running. Now, lastly, in findings over here on the left, if we had any, we can filter by the different category levels. So we can filter by high, medium, low, or informational. Now that's a quick run through and an overview of how you might utilize Amazon Inspector for your particular resources. If you need to automate some type of vulnerability scanning and reporting, this is the tool to use. You can run this on a weekly basis and then notify your admins whenever something is found via SNS. Now, we're going to wrap this clip up, and then I'll see you in the next one where we're going to start diving into AWS Guard Duty.